Good morning, people. Let's steer the conversation back towards sailing, seasteading, the pirate lifestyle. Because, after all, that is our vehicle for discussing these things. I think one of the things about my message that makes people's heads explode, and it makes their heads explode because most people are philosophically illiterate. They're historically illiterate, and they're typically culturally illiterate, especially if they come from the modern traditional conservative point of view, which is generally afflicted with a completely out of touch view of not only history, but of traditional conservative history. Not only is their image of their cultural heritage just flat wrong, but even the understanding of their own supposed religious tradition is often completely flat wrong. The modern traditional conservative view, especially if it's sprinkled with multi-level marketing Christianity, bears no resemblance to anything that could be authentically commingled with the Christ Gospels. It doesn't seem to slow anybody down. Certainly, it's done a very good job of eliminating the any vestiges of personal responsibility towards other people in the world. It's been very good at absolving itself of that. Despicable view, really. That's neither here nor there. I want to communicate that that the message that I am espousing here is extremely progressive. I would aspire, even if you were, say, a fan of Ken Wilber's four-quadrant model, which I am, to be definitely wholly within second-tier thought, if you're familiar with his dynamics. It confuses people because a lot of the lingo, if I'm throwing around words like liberty or sovereignty or stuff of that nature, these are words that are not commonly used by progressives today. They were progressive ideas 200 years ago, certainly not religious ideas, certainly were not conservative ideas. Conservatives 200 years ago were not interested in sovereignty nor liberty. They were interested in defending the divine rights of kings given by some mysterious guy in the sky. It's just that being 200 years behind the time, typically, especially philosophically, like those individuals are catching up to these ideas now, and they wave them around as if they've discovered themselves, these ideas themselves, whatever. Unfortunately, words like liberty, sovereignty, etc., this has been so co-opted by especially the alt-right that progressive individuals have a tendency to be kind of suspect, even allergic to that language. That's too bad, because they are at the forefront and will always be at the forefront of authentic progressive thinking. You can't have progressive thought without autonomy, liberty, personal sovereignty. There's no way. Progressivism has to be a forward-reaching, forward-sensing, life-affirming process. And if one is not empowered by enough personal agency to make choices and to live one's life in the manner that one sees fit, congruent with one's character, well, then the rest of it's a moot point. We should really put that foremost in our thinking because it informs the entire conversation. Another aspect that misleads a lot of people through the conversations about these important issues, again, comes from the traditional conservative crowd that spends a lot of time now running around complaining about postmodernist philosophy or such. Again, stuff that they're completely not conversant in, not seemingly able to understand that if you're looking at somebody like Foucault, there's a difference between understanding philosophy that is descriptive, talking about what's actually happening in the modern world, as opposed to philosophy that's prescriptive, like the crap you read in the Bible that's telling you how to live your life. Good philosophy is always descriptive, not prescriptive, but people who have a religious point of view often are not able to discern the difference. One of the straw man issues that you hear brought up again and again and again among people who tend towards the conservative angle of things is this perpetual bemoaning of cultural relativism and loss of objective truth. Now, mind you, you've got to snicker a touch if you're going to be lectured by an individual complaining about personal truths who also in the same vein believes in crap like the virgin birth. I honestly don't think that anybody who believes in stuff like the virgin birth or kinds of miracles like that really has any business in lecturing the rest of us about objectivity or the loss of it. But again, that's something that doesn't slow anybody down. I mean, it's important to understand that one of the central quote-unquote truths, small t, of the modern era and of modern informed thinkers, whether that's history, physics, mathematics, what have you, is relativism. Like, you ever hear Einstein? Like quantum theory? All of this, I mean, hard physics understands that it is impossible to separate the role of the observer from any given abstraction we might make. Here on this channel, we talked a great deal about general semantics and Alfred Korzybski, who walks through that in a very, very fine way, understanding that reality is not an illusion, but it is definitely an abstraction. The map is not the territory. An individual has to understand that their perspective and their ideas are solely their own, and there is limited capacity to communicate because of the unique lived experience of any given observer. No amount of rigor, no amount of logic can overcome that completely. The mistake that a lot of people make is recognizing the difficulty of, or impossibility, for example, perhaps, of objective communication being wholly transparent, that they just give up and they think that any old idea should do. We all have our personal truths, they say. Yes, but just the fact that our relationship to the world is not like Aristotle imagined, where there was actually capital T truths that were immortal and unchangeable that we could somehow know. In the modern era, we know that that's a fantasy. It's not true. Everything is a small t abstraction from our own perspective, biases, cognitive distortions, and the rest. Sure, that's the informed modern view. Yes, we all have our personal truths. Yes, but not all of them are of the same quality. And certainly not all of the thinkers who are coming up with those abstractions are of the same quality, nor do they have necessarily even the same intent. You can create a personal truth just by pulling a prejudice out of your butt, and many do. That's a very different quality of truth than an individual who, to the best of their ability, practices due diligence in their observation, who's conscious of their cognitive distortions, who make a real attempt at creating a position that is derived from these observations. A argument exists within that which allows them to describe the methodology by which they have come to hold the views they do. Neither of those are capital T truths. Both of those are personal truths. But the fact is, regardless. The quality isn't identical. That's another takeaway that's really important to understand in order to have a modern epistemological view of how truth, objectivity, subjectivity operates in the real world, and the posture we as life-affirming progressive people should have towards those kinds of ideas. So, I mean, there is, that floats around out there, this contrived tension between the individual and the progressive. I've mentioned this before. It's essential to understand that the empowered individual who is emancipated from this polarized cultural thinking realize that's just a mirage. The future for good people is to fuse the concerns of the individual with that of the collective good. It's about personal sovereignty, liberty, autonomy, agency, all of those things, and as they best relate to the collective whole. That's simply because once you have a modern worldview and you understand the profundity of relativistic thinking and its inherent validity, and to realize that to view either of the collective or the social or the individualistic as some kind of, well, identity of its own form, that's just an illusion. That's an illusion, and it's an arbitrary distinction that does not need to be made. There's a gigantic sliding scale on the spectrum. One end of it might be resembling something that we would call the individual, but the other end is certainly the collective. They are spectrums of the same thing. To make false distinctions there is incredibly misleading, and the modern mind must drop that practice immediately. The future will be more inclusive, more relative, hopefully more respecting of liberty, autonomy, and agency as well, more of all of the above, more humane, more accepting of difference, more multicultural, more pluralistic, all of those things. They do not have to be necessarily at odds with, again, the elegant tradition of progressive thought of maybe the 1700s that asserted the sovereignty of the individual in such an elegant manner. We need to carry that forward. That's critical, and add to it in a coherent manner. And again, my message here is a real attempt to try to do that. One of the essential lessons that comes from seafaring being a culture, and seafarers being of a culture that has been extremely pluralistic and extremely progressive and inclusive for centuries. It has to be. Seafarers travel. Seafarers encounter people who are not like themselves. Ultimately, a progressive, mature, life-affirming individual has to ask a rhetorical question about growth, about epistemology. Are you more likely to learn something interesting from somebody that resembles you or somebody that is markedly different? Now, I mean, you can see why in that context, by asking that question rhetorically, why it is that conservative individuals are so rigid about embracing pluralistic views or other perspectives. They're not interested in a life-affirming posture. They're not interested in progressive growth. Otherwise, you would embrace difference. The likelihood of learning something really interesting from somebody different than you is hugely higher than somebody who has cloned whatever your own personal ideology that your preferences have decided are is most interesting to you, I guess. It's regressive. It's life destroying as a posture. It doesn't surprise me at all that people who are afflicted by that kind of mentality, that death-seeking attitude, finds itself expressed in so many aspects of their life. No, I mean, if you want to be a progressive individual, you want to be life-affirming in the most and universal, holistic sense that one is able to manifest at whatever your current state of development, maturity, or consciousness might be. We're all striving there. You have to have an eagerness, in fact, to reach out towards encountering minds that are not yours, and to affirm the value of the truths that you might discover there, regardless of what their quality might be. Sure, a lot of them are going to be low quality, but they are different. Difference is where you learn. I just thought I would communicate this stuff straightforward and directly. Understanding the posture that I have here is again, a little curious for people because it commingles so many ideas from a pretty broad sampling of philosophical thought. Well, yeah, the whole point here of this entire process that I might call seasteading, or this entire lifestyle that I espouse, is one of reaching out towards other. It's, again, the purpose of life is found in living a life of purpose. And very often, that purpose is best found in connection, communion with other. To do that well requires embracing a multicultural, multipolar, relativistic way of encountering other people. That's part of it. You can't do it without it. I just thought this morning I would make that message completely overt so there were no miscommunications. Cheers, people.